My brother made the announcement before the food was even cleared from the table. We had buried my mother 6 hours earlier. 40 relatives sat in her living room, plates still in their hands, and my brother, Marcus, stood up the way people stand when they have been rehearsing something. "I have to share something difficult," he said, voice appropriately heavy. "We've looked everywhere. Mom's will cannot be located." The room exhaled in that particular way rooms exhale when people are deciding whether to be sad or suspicious. I did neither. I sat very still, my right hand resting in my coat pocket, 2 fingers wrapped around a small brass key my mother had pressed into my palm exactly 14 days before she died. Stay with me, because by the time the estate attorney opened his office on Monday morning, the will wasn't going to be missing anymore. My name is Claire Whitmore. I was 38 the afternoon my brother decided grief was a window and he intended to climb through it. He had been planning this for longer than the funeral. I just hadn't known until my mother made sure I would. She passed on a Thursday, after 8 months of an illness that moved slowly at first, and then all at once the way those things do. My brother, Marcus, was 4 years older, lived 20 minutes from her house, and had positioned himself as her primary caretaker in the final year, which meant he was also the person who managed her appointments, her paperwork, her medication schedule, and, increasingly, her mail. I visited every weekend I could. I lived 2 hours away, and I came every Saturday without fail, sometimes staying through Monday. What I noticed in those final months, quietly, without saying anything yet, was that certain things were changing in the house. A piece of furniture gone, replaced with something newer. The painting from the hallway no longer on the wall. Small absences that my mother, when I mentioned them gently, waved away. "Marcus is helping me simplify," she said once. I asked him to. I believed her the first time. The second time, I paid closer attention. The third time, I started taking photographs on my phone, not to confront anyone, but because my mother had taught me early that the things you notice quietly are often the things that matter most later. I didn't know yet how right she was going to turn out to be. 2 weeks before she passed, on a Saturday afternoon when Marcus had gone to pick up her prescription, she asked me to help her sit up straighter against the pillows. Then she took my hand, held it for a moment, and pressed something into my palm without looking at it herself, as if looking at it would have made it too final. It was a small brass key. A safe deposit number was scratched into the side in her handwriting, small and precise the way her handwriting always was. "Wait," she said. And that was all. Just that one word, wait. I knew what she meant. I closed my hand around the key and said nothing. We talked about other things for the rest of the afternoon. Neither of us mentioned it again. She passed 11 days later, on a Thursday morning, with Marcus in the room and me 40 minutes away on the highway, driving as fast as I safely could. I did not make it in time, which is its own grief and one I carry separately from everything that came after. The funeral was the following Monday. The gathering at her house was that afternoon, and by early evening, before the last of the relatives had finished their coffee, Marcus was on his feet with an announcement he had clearly prepared, and an expression calibrated to look like reluctant duty. "I've looked through everything," he said, "her filing cabinet, her desk, the lockbox in the closet. I can't find the will anywhere. I think we may need to proceed without one." Proceed without one. That phrase did a lot of work in a very small number of words. Without a will, intestate succession laws would apply, and as the eldest child with documented involvement in her care, Marcus had already, I later discovered, consulted with a local attorney about what that process would look like in his favor. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I looked at my brother across the room, my hand still in my coat pocket, still wrapped around the key, and I said one sentence. "I'll call the estate attorney in the morning." The room shifted. A few relatives exchanged glances. Marcus's expression moved through 3 things quickly: surprise, recalculation, and then a carefully reassembled look of cooperation. "Of course," he said smoothly. He called me that night at 10:45. I let it go to voicemail. His message was warm and measured and contained a sentence I wrote down immediately after listening to it. I just want to make sure we handle this the way Mom would have wanted, together, as a family. Together, the word people use when they mean they would like to supervise your decisions. What Marcus did not know was that the safe deposit box was at a branch of the bank our mother had used for 40 years, the one 3 blocks from her house, the one Marcus had driven past every week for the last year while managing her affairs. He had never once thought to ask whether she had a box there. He had looked in the filing cabinet and the lockbox and the desk, and concluded, on the basis of what he could access, that there was nothing left he hadn't already seen. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a great many things. Stay with me, because what was inside that box wasn't just the will, it was a letter in my mother's handwriting dated 3 weeks before she died that described in precise and careful detail everything she had watched happen to her own belongings over the past 8 months and exactly what she wanted done about it. Monday morning I was at the bank when it opened at 9. I showed my identification, presented the key, signed the access form, and was taken to a private room where a narrow metal drawer was placed in front of me. I sat alone for a moment before opening it. Inside were 4 things: the original signed and notarized will dated 14 months earlier and witnessed by 2 people whose names I recognized as her longtime neighbors, a sealed letter in her handwriting addressed simply to Claire, a smaller envelope containing a handwritten inventory list with dates, and a photograph, taken in the living room, showing a wall where the painting used to hang, with a date written on the back in her handwriting. I opened the letter last. I read it twice before I trusted myself to read it correctly. She had written it in the same precise, unhurried handwriting she used for everything: grocery lists and birthday cards, and the notes she used to pack in my school lunches until I was old enough to tell her it embarrassed me and young enough to miss it the moment she stopped. She wrote that she had noticed things going missing over the past several months, that she had said nothing because she had not wanted to believe what she was noticing, that she had eventually asked Marcus directly once, and he had told her he was selling certain items on her behalf and holding the proceeds in a personal account for her care expenses. She had not asked to see the account. She had wanted to believe him. By the time she pressed the key into my hand, she had stopped wanting to believe him and started wanting there to be a record. The inventory list in the smaller envelope was in her handwriting as well. 12 items, each one listed with a description, an estimated value, and a date she believed it had left the house. The total estimated value across all 12 items was $64,000. Not 1 cent of it had appeared in any documented care expense account. I knew because I asked. I spent that Monday afternoon on the phone with her bank, her doctor's office, and her insurance provider. The care expenses Marcus had referenced were fully covered. There was no supplemental personal account. There was no record of any proceeds being held anywhere on her behalf. The $64,000 had simply moved, quietly, in small amounts, over 8 months, into the silence that surrounds a woman who is too ill to keep track of everything and too trusting of the person she has put in charge. I called the estate attorney that afternoon. His name was Gordon Osei, and he had handled my mother's legal affairs for over a decade. When I told him I had the original will and a notarized letter from my mother describing potential asset misappropriation, he was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" he asked. "I'll be there," I said. Marcus called again that evening. This time I answered. His tone was still warm, still measured, still operating on the assumption that the will was missing, and the situation was therefore open to interpretation. "I've been thinking," he said, "that we should sit down together before involving attorneys. Keep this simple. Keep it in the family." "I've already spoken to Gordon," I said. Silence. Not long, but the specific kind that happens when someone realizes a door they thought was open has just been found to be locked. "You found something?" he asked, carefully. "I found what Mom left me," I said. "I'll see you at Gordon's office Thursday morning." He arrived 12 minutes late, which told me he had spent those 12 minutes deciding how to walk into a room he no longer controlled. Gordon had the will on the table when Marcus sat down. He had the notarized letter beside it. He had the inventory list in a folder that he did not open immediately, which I later understood was intentional. He let Marcus look at the will first, let him understand that the missing document had been found, let that reality settle before introducing what came with it. Marcus's attorney, who he had brought without telling me he would, leaned forward and asked about the chain of custody on the will. Gordon answered calmly. It had been in a bank safe deposit box, accessed that Monday by the named secondary holder on the box, my mother's daughter. A holder my mother had added to the account 11 months earlier, quietly, during a solo visit to the branch, on a morning Marcus had assumed she was resting. My mother had been planning this longer than I knew. She had added my name to that box before she ever pressed the key into my hand. She had made sure that even if I had somehow lost the key, the will was not accessible to the person she had stopped trusting it with. Gordon opened the folder. He placed the inventory list on the table. He explained, in the measured language of someone who has delivered difficult information before, that a preliminary review suggested a significant discrepancy between documented care expenditures and the estimated value of assets that had left the property over the preceding 8 months. He said the word discrepancy carefully, the way lawyers say words that mean something more specific than they sound. Marcus looked at the list for a long time. Then he looked at me. "She made that list herself?" he asked quietly. "She did, before she gave me the key." He looked back at the paper. "I was trying to help her." "I know," I said, "and I did in the way you know something that was true once and then stopped being true, and the person who changed it has been hoping you wouldn't notice the difference."
The estate process took 4 months. That is faster than most people expect, and slower than grief makes it feel. Gordon filed the will at the probate court the week after our meeting. The inventory list and my mother's letter were submitted as supporting documentation in a separate civil matter that ran alongside the probate proceedings. Marcus did not contest the will. His attorney, I was told by Gordon in careful professional language, had advised him that contesting a notarized original in the presence of a contemporaneous letter from the deceased describing her intentions would be unlikely to succeed, and considerably more likely to draw attention to matters he would prefer remained unexamined. The civil matter moved more slowly. The $64,000 in estimated asset value became the subject of a formal accounting demand. Marcus provided records. The records had gaps. The gaps were documented. By the end of the 4 months, a settlement figure had been arrived at privately, repayment of the documented shortfall plus legal fees, structured over 18 months, with a formal acknowledgement signed by both parties. No criminal referral was made. That was a decision I made, and I made it deliberately, not because what happened was acceptable, but because my mother's letter had said, near the end, that she did not want the resolution of this to become something that consumed more of my life than the grief already would. I honored that. The estate was distributed according to the will, which was specific and fair in the way my mother had always been specific and fair about things that mattered to her. My share was larger than Marcus had expected, which told me she had made adjustments at some point after she began noticing things go missing. She had done it quietly and officially through Gordon's office, without saying anything to either of us. I think about that decision sometimes. She could have confronted Marcus directly. She could have removed him from her care. She could have told me what was happening while it was happening, instead of 14 days before the end. She chose instead to build a quiet record and put the key in my hand and trust me to know what to do with it. I did not host a gathering at her house after the estate closed. I did not make any announcement. The relatives who had been in that living room the afternoon Marcus said the will was missing eventually heard, in the way relatives hear things, that it had been found, and that the estate had been settled, and that things were not exactly as they had appeared that afternoon. I did not provide details. I did not need to. Marcus and I do not speak now. That is not a decision I made dramatically or all at once. It is simply the place we arrived at after everything that had to be said was said, and everything that could not be undone had been accounted for as precisely as it could be. I have made my peace with the distance. I think she knew this was a possible outcome and made her choices anyway, which tells me she had made her own peace with it before I had to make mine. I kept the key. I know that is a small detail, but it felt important enough to mention. It sits in a dish on my kitchen windowsill now, the same place she used to keep the spare key to her own house. I see it every morning. Some days it is just a key. Other days it is the last thing she ever handed me and the most complete sentence she ever spoke in a single word. Wait. When you find what I left there for you to find. I waited, and what I found when I stopped waiting was exactly what she had left there for me to find. She knew he would look in the obvious places. She knew I would look in the right one. If someone is moving things quietly while you are grieving loudly, look for what they did not expect you to have been given. Sometimes the person who loved you most prepared for this long before you knew you would need it. If this reminded you of someone who built a quiet record when no one thought they were paying attention, you already know who needs to hear this story. And if you have ever been trusted with something you did not fully understand until the moment you needed it most, stay close. There is another story coming tomorrow.